This is session number 9 of the Sales Mastermind podcast. Today in the hot seat, we have Osvaldo. Hit the music. Hello and welcome to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Get ready to harness the power of the Mastermind community and take your sales to the next level. I'm your host, Jonathan Stewart. Today's question comes from Osvaldo. He asked, what are some quality questions that you can use while selling? This is a great question, Osvaldo. I think this will be very helpful for our community as well. But as you know, if you're in sales or you're in marketing, you know that questions are really one of the most powerful and helpful tools that you can use in your repertoire. Questions can lead you to the answers of what the true desires and what the true reasons are for people why they buy. And so if you ask your prospects or your customers the proper questions, you'll be able to figure out what it's going to take to be able to convince them to buy your product. So questions are a very, very important tool. Now, with this podcast, what I don't want to do is give you the verbatim questions to ask because, as you know, every sales situation is very different and requires a different approach. And so I could list a series of questions, but it's only going to be helpful to maybe a few select people. And I really don't know what Osvaldo's situation is here, what he's trying to sell, and where they're trying to sell it. But so in order to be able to make this helpful for everyone, I want to go ahead and give 10 foundational principles of asking questions. So this is kind of going to be rules and framework of how to craft your own questions instead of giving verbatim questions. I know this will be a lot more helpful. And you know what? It's better for questions to be in your own terms and the way you would actually say a question. You don't want to just go memorize a bunch of canned questions that really aren't going to be very helpful. People will know if you've just memorized a script and it's not going to be effective. I know one of the things that I remember when I was growing up, my mom actually for a while did some telemarketing. And one thing she figured out very quickly was that if she used the canned speech that the telemarketers gave her to use, it wasn't very effective. But when she actually just talked to people as a real person and communicated with them and asked them right questions, she was able to have a lot better results. And so that's going to work telemarketing, that's going to work in physical sales, whatever it be, you need to ask truly good questions. And one of the ways that you can do that is just to be really curious and to listen. So 10 foundational principles of asking questions. The first one, and I believe this is where you should start with every sales conversation, is you need to build a little rapport with them before you ask all your questions. You think about this for a minute. If you are just meeting somebody for the first time, you're not normally going to be completely transparent and honest with that person. You're not just going to reveal all before you trust that person. So what I think is important is, first of all, to be kind and genuinely interested, of course, smile. But then also you need to make sure that in a short period of time you can demonstrate that you're really able to help that person if they give you the proper information. They need to know that if I do tell them my true problem, if I do really get honest and I get open with them and I'm transparent, that this is going to be helpful for me. They need to think that. And so one of the ways I think you can do this well is to give examples of how you have helped other people in the industry as well. So you might say, this is a problem that so-and-so customer also had, and we were able to solve it by doing this and that. And so that would be a good way to build that rapport and let them know that, hey, I can really solve this problem that you're having. So build rapport. That's the first foundational principle of asking all questions. Secondly, you need to avoid canned or overused questions. So there's a host of questions out there that are super common. One of the ones that I get stuck even asking sometimes, and it's just kind of a filler question, but it's, how's business? Now, that can be an okay question, but in general, it doesn't get you anything. It doesn't get you any good information. It's not really going to help during the sales conversation, but you need to ask more specific question that could be related to that, like, how are you moving this particular product? Or what are customers saying about this product? You could go more direct in that question, then you'll actually get answers that would guide you properly. So avoid canned or overused questions. It really comes down to no matter who you're dealing with, business owners, consumers, corporate buyers, or anybody like that, they're constantly being sold. People are constantly trying to sell them things. And so they will tune out canned or overused questions like static, when you are using these questions like that, they'll completely tune you out and you won't get anywhere. So avoid these canned or overused questions. The third foundational principle is to make sure that you ask relevant questions. So you got to make sure that the questions that you have are very relevant to the customer that you're speaking with. The best way to do this is to actually spend just a few minutes before the sales conversation to do a little research on that customer. So if this is a previous customer of yours, go back to your records. Hopefully you have like a CRM tool where you've registered every email that you've sent to them. You've put notes about calls you've had or visits. Or if this is a brand new customer, go ahead and check out their website. If you know the people within the organization, go ahead and go on LinkedIn and look at their profiles and just kind of figure out who they are and what they might care about. Then what you want to do is to kind of guess about maybe some of the things of what they might care about and build your questions around that. Of course, you may not hit it every time, but hopefully with your guesses, you'll get a couple that are going to draw out things that are interesting and that could actually be helpful to you. So ask those relevant questions by doing a little research on the customer that you're about to go to. You want to make sure you do this really mainly because you want to make sure, like anything, that you stand out from the competition and show that you are really in touch with them and that you've spent a little extra time, and you'll appear to be a quality person because you spent that extra time. So ask those relevant questions. The fourth foundational principle is to make sure that you do actually have some of the common questions memorized. So this is not canned, this is not common questions, but these are specific industry questions that are helpful everywhere you go within your industry. And so you're not going to want to make these sound memorized, but what you'll want to do is get the basic concepts down and memorized and kind of keep these in a specific order and these questions that you've had past success with. So let's say that you always come in and you ask them about how a particular product is selling, and then you lead from there to a question about maybe some of the products that people are asking for and that they're having a hard time getting. And so you could kind of bring a conversation that direction and then maybe offer something that you offer within that niche that would fill that hole, and you could sell that product to them. So you might find that if you ask these questions a certain way and if you do it a certain way, that it has really good success. So you know what? Don't go away from that just because you don't want to ask the same questions. Go ahead and use that over and over. Just tailor it to the environment and to make sure that it's not just a memorized speech, but it's actually kind of just a framework. And so have some common questions memorized, but when I say memorized, I don't necessarily mean word for word, but rather memorize a framework and use variations of these questions because you know what? When it comes down to it, you know they work. And it's almost like productizing your questions, productizing your sales presentation. Anytime we can productize something and make it kind of standard and make it effective, that's going to be a very useful tool for you. The fifth foundational principle is to make sure that you have a goal for every question. You know, this comes down to asking very intentional questions that will actually reveal certain things to you that you're looking for. You should know where exactly you're going with each question, and you should be driving the potential customer to a desired result. There's nothing worse than asking a bunch of filler questions and getting some information from a customer and then realizing that really didn't matter. You really didn't gain any ground by asking those questions. You need to actually have a roadmap of, when I ask this question, I'm looking for this kind of answer. If I don't get that kind of answer, then I need to ask a clarifying question until I kind of get a sense of that particular aspect. And then once I get that locked down, then I'll go into this direction. And what you're doing is you're guiding the person to a spot to where you can sell them the product, to where they're open for it. And in a sense, maybe they almost even ask for it if you've asked the proper questions. And so lead into them by having a goal for every question. Make these very intentional questions. The 10th foundational principle of asking questions is to make sure that you're respectful with your questions. So you want to make sure that you don't offend anybody, because of course if you offend your prospect, you're going to lose the sale. And one of the best ways to avoid this is just to stay on topic. You know, it's okay to chat beforehand and kind of get comfortable with the person for a few minutes and just to kind of talk about various things, whether that be, you know, sports things or whatever. But make sure that you don't get too off topic and start talking about things that could offend people. So try to stay on topic, try to stay on the topic of the sale, the product, and that'll keep you from getting into areas where you could offend people. You don't want to offend people and lose their sale because of that. So make sure you're very respectful with your questions and you're very respectful to the people that you're asking questions to. The 7th foundational principle of asking questions is to make sure that you ask direct questions. And so as I've said in previous blog posts and on Instagram and different things, direct questions get direct answers. Make sure you're not afraid to ask very pointed and direct questions to get the actual information that you want. Just as direct questions get direct answers, vague questions will get you vague answers. And so don't be afraid to come in and say specifically, this is the question that I have, and say that question very clearly to get that answer that you want. Now, a tip on this is not the first thing you do. You don't walk in with a really direct question to somebody cold off on the spot, but rather you build a little rapport. You make sure, like with the first principle we talked about, that they understand that you really can help them if they give you your information. You make sure that they know you're honest, you're truthful, you're trustworthy, and then you can go into direct questions. And so here's an example of a question that I've actually used very effectively, very directly, that was effective. I recently had some customers in my sales territory that I noticed their sales were lagging compared to last year's sales. And what I would ask them is, hey, I've noticed that, recently your sales have been quite down. You haven't been purchasing as much from us recently. What can we do to earn back your business? And so that will just quickly get me the answer that I'm looking for. If it comes down to that maybe there is a competitor that has come in that is a lower price, then they'll simply tell me, you know what, we're able to get that same product for this lower price. Or there might actually be an issue that maybe they talked to somebody in your company and they got an answer they didn't like, and maybe they're a little bit offended. You'll get that answer as well, but it'll get you to where you can solve that problem because you asked a very direct question. And so asking those direct questions, don't be afraid to ask direct questions. The 8th foundational principle of asking questions is to make sure that you ask open-ended questions. So this is something that you'll hear from almost anyone that talks about asking questions. And the reason you'll hear it all the time is for the simple reason that it is a great principle. So if you're in sales, you quickly realize that your goal is to get the other person to talk. And this reason is because the more you can get them to talk, the more you will get information from them that will help you understand what motivates them. And once you get this information about what motivates them, you can tailor your sales presentation to address that issue. And so ask those open-ended questions, encourage them to talk by being actually interested in what they're saying, by following up with questions that are related. So ask those open-ended questions, get them to talk so you can figure out what really motivates them to action. The 9th foundational principle is to make sure that you ask good follow-up questions, and to clarify what people are saying, ask follow-up questions that dig deeper and get to the real problem. So you need to ask yourself, am I dealing with just the product of the problem, just kind of the surface fruit of that problem, or am I actually dealing with what the root of the problem is? And so you need to find out what that root cause is for that particular, the reason they've given that answer to you. And you need to find out what the root cause of maybe that pain point is, or the root cause of that lack of desire, that root cause for something not selling well, or the root cause of something that they don't want to carry or they're not interested in. You need to find out why they're not interested and find that root cause. So often when you're needing to clarify the root of a problem and you need to dig deeper, it's because you found an objection. And so in order to answer this objection, you got to understand why they have this objection. Once you really truly understand why they have an objection, you can really give an answer that really addresses that objection, and you'll have a lot better chance of getting that sell even if there was an objection in the beginning. The 10th foundational principle of asking questions is very simple and very important, but it's simply ask the question, then shut up and listen. And so as a salesperson, I know how easy it is to maybe have an idea of where you want to go and what you're trying to do. And you can many times get so caught up in maybe the process of the sale that you ask a question, but then you don't really listen closely to what the customer's saying. And they've just poured their heart out to you. They've told you exactly what they need, what they want. And then you ask maybe a question that follows up, and it really doesn't tie to that. And a few of those in a row, and the customer realizes that you're not really listening. Or maybe you recommend a product that doesn't meet what they told you they wanted, and that'll show very quickly. You'll lose rapport, and you won't close that sale. So ask the questions like we've been talking about, but then shut up and listen. What's the point of asking a question if you really don't hear what the customer says? The person on the other end can tell when you're not paying attention, and when you don't give them that attention and you don't give them that respect, they're not going to actually give you honest and open questions. But by listening to them, you'll be able to follow up with questions that actually do make sense to the customer, which actually do make sense to the sale, and that'll drive you directly to be able to answer those questions and getting that sell. So these are those 10 foundational principles that you need to make sure you do. Once again, this is a framework. Use this framework and think about it as you are going through your sales processes. Spend some time outside of the sale, just maybe on your day off, or maybe when you have some time in the office, or whatever you do to prepare for a sale, and maybe write down some questions that you would like to ask for a particular sales situation. Spend some time before that sale, and then make sure that you are very open to adapting. So you might have an idea of where you want to take the sales conversation and the questions that you might want to ask based on these 10 principles that we've talked about. But you may get to the sales presentation and have to go a completely different direction. Either way, keep these things in mind. Make sure that you're using these 10 foundational principles. And you might want to re-listen to this again and write them down, or go to our show notes, which I'll mention at the end in just a minute, where you can check out this list of the 10 foundational principles. But use these. I know they'll be effective. Using this in my sales presentations have been very effective. And I can tell you when I haven't used these, I was not often very successful. So use these 10 foundational principles to guide your question asking in sales. So as always, we'll have the show notes at salespurpose.com/session 009. Be sure and check that out so you can find the 10 principles typed out for you, so you can save those for future use. Also, it will have links for several different things. One of those things that we'll have a link for there on the podcast blog is the community, the Sales Purpose community link. So as we've mentioned before, if you've listened to several podcasts, you realize that this is the official podcast of the Sales Mastermind community on Facebook. What we do is the question is answered here in the podcast by me, and then that question is posted for the Facebook community for them to also chime in and give their answers as well for the person. And so please go over there, go to salespurpose.com/community. That'll forward you over to Facebook. You can request to join the group, and we'll get you approved. And then you can help and join that community, not only to ask questions, but also to help other people answer their questions, and also to be a part of a community that is of like-minded people. Another link that you'll find over there is the link to ask your own question. So this podcast exists to answer your sales and marketing questions. And so you can send those to me very, very many ways, but one of the ways is to just simply email me at Jonathan, the letter S, at salespurpose.com, JONATHANS, at salespurpose.com. You'll find that there. But if you just go to salespurpose.com/SM podcast, you'll also find a way that you can record a voicemail question and leave me a question that way. And I can actually use that audio here on the podcast to have you ask your question and, of course, answer it. So just go over there to salespurpose.com/SM podcast. Check that out. Also, don't forget to go to the Sales Purpose blog and check out all the helpful resources and blog posts that we have there to help you along your sales and marketing journey. Well, I really do appreciate you listening today, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day or night, whatever it is for you, and take care. Thank you for listening to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes below for any resources or sites mentioned in the podcast. Also, be sure to subscribe and join the Facebook community to continue the conversation. Here's to your success.